The man who shuffled into the diner appeared to be just another shadow of the city, lost and forgotten. His coat was threadbare, his hands trembled, and he didn't have enough change to pay for a simple cup of coffee. But this man was a carefully constructed lie. He was a billionaire titan conducting a secret, deeply personal experiment. His subject was the young waitress who served him, a woman drowning in personal tragedy, who had every reason to be bitter at the world. He was watching her, testing her, searching for a flicker of genuine kindness to prove his cynical worldview wrong. She had no idea the fate of a multi-billion-dollar fortune rested on her next move. The bell above the door of the Willow Creek Diner chimed a tinny, cheerful note that felt like a lie. Outside, a relentless November rain lashed against the windows, turning the bustling Chicago streets into a watercolor blur of gray and neon. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of hot coffee, frying bacon, and the low hum of conversations. For Clara Mayhew, it was just another Tuesday, another 16-hour double shift, another day of forcing a smile while the weight of her world pressed down on her shoulders. Clara was 24, but some days she felt ancient. Her life was a frantic, exhausting cycle. Wait tables take the late-night bus to her tiny apartment, check in on her younger brother Leo at the long-term care facility via a crackly video call, sleep for a few precious hours, and then do it all over again. Leo, her brilliant, funny 17-year-old brother, was the sun her life orbited. A rare degenerative neuromuscular condition had stolen his ability to walk and was slowly, cruelly stealing more. The experimental treatments that offered a sliver of hope came with a price tag that looked like a telephone number. So Clara smiled. She carried heavy plates until her arms ached, and she thanked people who tipped her with loose change. It was during the late afternoon lull, that quiet moment between the lunch rush and the dinner crowd, that he first came in. He looked like a ghost blown in by the storm. His trench coat was a faded, threadbare thing, patched at the elbows, and smelling faintly of rain and mothballs. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes a pale, watery blue that seemed to hold a century of sorrow. He moved with a slow, deliberate shuffle, leaning heavily on a simple wooden cane. He chose the smallest booth in the back, the one with a tear in the vinyl seat that everyone else avoided. Clara grabbed a menu and a glass of water and walked over. "Welcome to the Willow Creek," she said, her voice soft. "Can I get you started with something to drink? Coffee's fresh." The old man looked up at her, and for a second his gaze was surprisingly sharp, analytical. It was a look that didn't match the rest of his frail appearance. Then it was gone, replaced by a gentle, tired smile. "Coffee would be a blessing, young lady." "Black, please." His voice was raspy, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. She brought the coffee, her movements efficient and graceful. He wrapped his gnarled, trembling hands around the warm mug as if it were a lifeline. He didn't look at the menu. He just stared out the window, watching the rain. Her boss, Mr. Henderson, a man whose personality was as greasy as the diner's onion rings, stomped over to her station by the register. "What's his deal?" He grunted, nodding his bald head toward the back booth. "He going to order, or just take up space?" "This isn't a shelter, Clara. He just got here. Mr. Henderson, I'm sure he's deciding." "Yeah, well, he looks like he's deciding between ordering a water or a free napkin. Keep an eye on him. Make sure he pays." Clara clenched her jaw, but kept her expression neutral. Of course. She went back to the old man's table 20 minutes later. He hadn't touched the menu. He had, however, finished the coffee. "Can I get you a refill?" she asked. "Or maybe something to eat?" "The tomato soup is really good on a day like this." He looked down at his hands, then back at her. There was a flicker of shame in his eyes. "I'm just trying to get warm, miss. I don't have much on me." I thought maybe I could just sit for a bit. Clara's heart, already heavy with her own troubles, felt a familiar pang of sympathy. She saw in his face the quiet desperation she felt every time she looked at Leo's medical bills. She knew what it was like to feel the world closing in on you. She gave him a reassuring smile, the kind she usually reserved for Leo. "The first refill is free," she said, already reaching for the coffee pot. "And you're not bothering anyone. Take all the time you need." As she poured the steaming black liquid into his cup, his eyes met hers again. This time they weren't just sad, they were searching. "You're very kind," he whispered. "Everyone deserves a little kindness." She replied simply, before turning to take the order of a family that had just come in. For the next hour the old man sat there, nursing his second cup of coffee. He never asked for anything else. Mr. Henderson shot him and Clara several venomous looks, but the diner got busy again, and he was distracted. Finally, the old man slowly, painfully pushed himself up from the booth. He shuffled to the front counter, his hand digging deep into a worn pocket. He pulled out a small handful of coins and carefully counted them onto the counter. $1.78. The coffee was $2 plus tax. He looked up at Clara, his face etched with humiliation. I seem to be a little short." Mr. Henderson materialized beside her. "What a surprise," he sneered. "Look, old man, I'm not running a charity. Pay up or I'm calling the cops." The old man flinched as if he'd been struck. His watery eyes widened with fear. Before she could even think, Clara stepped forward, placing her hand gently over the coins. "It's fine, Mr. Henderson. He's with me. It's on my tab." She looked at the old man. "Don't you worry about it, sir." Henderson glared at her. "That's coming out of your tips, Mayhew." I know she said, her voice steady, as she looked not at her boss, but at the stranger. The old man stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. A complex storm of emotions moved across his face, surprise, relief, and something else, something deeper. He seemed to want to say something, but no words came. He simply gave her a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture of profound gratitude. Then he turned and shuffled out into the rain, the tinny bell marking his departure. Clara watched him go, feeling the familiar burn of injustice on his behalf. She took a quarter from her apron pocket, added it to his coins, and rang up the sale. It was only a few cents, but for her it felt like a fortune. She had no idea that her small, almost instinctive act of compassion had been the first move in a game she didn't know she was playing. Miles away in a black town car with rain-slicked windows, Arthur Chamberlain sat in the plush leather passenger seat. The tattered coat was gone, replaced by a hand-tailored cashmere overcoat. The frail, trembling old man had vanished, replaced by a figure of quiet, immense power. His pale blue eyes were no longer watery or sad. They were sharp, intelligent, and deeply thoughtful. His driver and long-time legal counsel, Benjamin Carter, glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Well," Benjamin asked, his tone dry, "did you find what you were looking for in that greasy spoon, Arthur? Or did you just get a new appreciation for the working-class struggle?" Arthur didn't answer immediately. He stared out at the city lights painting streaks across his window. He was thinking of the waitress Clara. He'd seen the exhaustion in her eyes, the worn-out soles of her shoes. He'd seen her boss's cruelty. And yet she had acted with a simple, unhesitating grace that had struck him to his core. For the first time in over a decade, since his bitter divorce from a woman who loved his portfolio more than the man who'd built it, Arthur Chamberlain felt a flicker of something he thought he'd lost forever hope. Perhaps Benjamin, he finally said, his voice no longer raspy, but a deep, resonant baritone. Perhaps I did. The test had just begun. The old man, who Clara had started to think of as Mr. Finn, after he'd mumbled something that sounded like it became a semi-regular feature at the Willow Creek Diner. He'd appear 2 or 3 times a week, always in the quiet afternoon hours, always taking the same torn booth in the back. He never ordered more than a coffee, or on one occasion, a single slice of toast. And he was always without fail a little bit short on the bill. Each time Clara would cover the difference without a word. It became their silent ritual. He would place his coins on the counter, a look of pained apology on his face, and she would give him a small conspiratorial smile and add a few of her own coins to the pile. She learned bits and pieces about him in fragmented sentences. He lived in a small room nearby. He didn't have any family left. He spoke of a wife named Margaret, who had passed years ago, his eyes growing distant and misty when he mentioned her name. Clara found herself looking forward to his visits. In a life filled with relentless pressure and anxiety, his quiet presence was a strange sort of comfort. He was a problem she could solve. She couldn't cure Leo, she couldn't erase her debt, but she could make sure an old man had a warm place to sit and a hot cup of coffee. It was a small act of control in a life that felt completely out of her hands. Her generosity, however, did not go unnoticed. Mr. Henderson's scrutiny intensified. He watched her like a hawk whenever Mr. Finn was in the diner. "You're a real bleeding heart, aren't you, Mayhew?" He'd sneer, wiping the counter with a dirty rag. "You know there's a word for people who give away what they don't have. It's broke." He started assigning her the worst tasks, cleaning the grease trap, scrubbing the grout in the restrooms, taking out the overflowing dumpsters in the rain. He cut her hours 1 week, claiming business was slow, though the diner was as busy as ever. It was a punishment, a slow, grinding campaign to make her quit. But Clara couldn't quit. This job, as miserable as Henderson made it, was Leo's lifeline. One particularly grueling Thursday, after a long shift, Clara sat in the drafty waiting room of Leo's care facility for her nightly video call. The Wi-Fi was spotty, and Leo's face kept freezing on the small screen of her phone. He looked pale, thinner than last week. "Hey, superstar," she said, forcing a bright tone. "How was your day? Did you get that new book I sent?" Leo managed a weak smile. "Hey, Clara. Yeah, it came. Sci-fi. My favorite. Thanks." His voice was faint. "The doctors were talking today about the next phase of the trial. It's a lot." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. "A lot? How a lot of money?" He hesitated. "They said the initial deposit is 5 figures, just to secure my spot." He tried to sound casual, but she could see the fear in his eyes, the fear of being a burden. "It's crazy. Don't even worry about it. It's not possible." "No," Clara said, her voice fierce with a sudden, desperate resolve. "Don't say that. It is possible. I'll figure it out, Leo. I promise you. I will figure it out." After the call ended, she buried her face in her hands, the cheerful facade crumbling. 5 figures. It might as well have been 5 million. The tips she'd been using to cover Mr. Finn's coffee suddenly felt like a monumental foolishness. She was barely treading water, and here she was, plugging someone else's tiny leak while her own dam was about to burst. A bitter wave of resentment washed over her, and for a moment she was angry at Mr. Finn, at his helplessness, at his quiet claim on the little she had. The next day, Mr. Finn came in as usual. Clara was exhausted, her mind racing with impossible calculations. She was short with him, her smile tight and brittle. She slammed his coffee down a little too hard, causing some of it to slosh over the side. "Sorry," she muttered, not meeting his eyes. He looked at her, his pale eyes full of concern. "Is everything all right, my dear?" "Everything's fine," she snapped. "Just busy." She felt a hot flush of shame immediately after. It wasn't his fault. He didn't ask for her charity. She had offered it. He was just a lonely old man, and she was taking her fear and frustration out on him. Later, as he was preparing to leave, another test was laid. Arthur had been debating this with Benjamin for days. Benjamin argued it was emotional manipulation. Arthur insisted it was a necessary escalation. He needed to see if her kindness had a breaking point. As Mr. Finn stood up, he fumbled with his coat, and a small worn envelope fell from his pocket, sliding unseen under the edge of the booth. He paid for his coffee, short as always, and Clara, wrestling with her guilt, covered the difference with a sigh. He gave her his customary nod and left. It wasn't until she was clearing the table that she saw it. The envelope was thin and unsealed. Her name wasn't on it, but the words "rent money" were scrawled across the front in shaky handwriting. Her heart sank. This was his rent, the money he needed to keep a roof over his head. Her first instinct was to open it. Her mind, poisoned by desperation, screamed at her. How much is in there? 100, 200. It's not enough for Leo, but it's a start. He's old. He probably wouldn't even remember where he lost it. The thought was ugly, venomous, and it terrified her. Was this who she was becoming? Her hands trembled as she picked it up. She could feel the folded bills inside. It felt heavy like a moral weight. She thought of Leo's pale face on the screen. She thought of Mr. Finn shuffling out into the cold. Mr. Henderson was watching her from the kitchen pass-through. He'd seen the envelope fall. He saw her pick it up. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. He was waiting for her to slip it into her apron. It would be the perfect excuse to finally get rid of her. Clara took a deep breath. She clutched the envelope tightly in her hand, walked straight past her smirking boss, and out the front door of the diner. The cold air hit her like a slap. She scanned the street, her eyes darting left and right. There, halfway down the block, was Mr. Finn's slow, shuffling figure. "Mr. Finn," she yelled, her voice raw. "Wait." She ran, dodging pedestrians, her cheap apron flapping behind her. She caught up to him, panting, the cold air burning her lungs. "You drop this," she said, holding out the envelope. "In the diner. I saw it fall. It's your rent money." Arthur Chamberlain stopped, turning to face her. He looked at the envelope in her hand, then at her flushed, earnest face. He had placed exactly $300 inside a significant sum for someone like Mr. Finn, and a tempting one for someone in Clara's position. He had been 70% sure she would return it. But to see her standing there, breathless in the cold, having run out of her workplace to ensure he wasn't homeless, it hit him with a force that surprised him. He took the envelope, his fingers brushing against hers. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with an emotion that was not entirely an act. "My dear girl, you have no idea. Thank you." As she walked back to the diner, a strange lightness filled her chest. She was still broke. Leo was still sick. Nothing had fundamentally changed, and yet everything felt different. In choosing to do the right thing, she had saved a small piece of herself. Back in his car, a block away, Arthur held the envelope. Benjamin was silent, his usual skepticism momentarily absent. "She ran after me," Benjamin Arthur said quietly, almost to himself. She ran. "So she's an honest person, Arthur. We've established that. Is the experiment over?" Arthur looked out the window, his expression unreadable. He was thinking of the desperation he had glimpsed in her eyes earlier that day, the snap in her voice. He had pushed her, and she had bent, but she hadn't broken. Now, however, the real players were about to enter the game. He had seen the look on Henderson's face through the diner window. The manager had seen the whole exchange, and a greedy, foolish man with a little bit of information could be far more dangerous than any test he could devise. "No, Arthur," said his voice grim. "I'm afraid it's about to get much more complicated." Mr. Henderson had seen it all. He'd seen the envelope fall, seen Clara pick it up, and had eagerly anticipated the moment he'd catch her pocketing the cash. Her subsequent dash out the door had first confused, then intrigued him. Why would she run after that deadbeat? But when he saw her hand, the envelope back, a different kind of calculation began clicking away in his mind. There was something off about the old man. People that poor didn't just lose an envelope of cash, and the look on the old man's face when she'd returned it. It wasn't just gratitude. It was something more. Henderson was a man who believed everyone had an angle. He just couldn't figure this one out yet. His curiosity piqued. He decided to do a little surveillance of his own. For the next week, Henderson treated Clara with a bizarre, unsettling courtesy. He stopped the snide remarks and the demeaning tasks. He even gave her the prime tables during the lunch rush. Clara was wary, but too consumed with Leo's deteriorating condition to give it much thought. The deadline for the trial deposit was looming, and a sick knot of panic was permanently lodged in her stomach. A few days later, Mr. Finn came in for his coffee. Henderson, who usually ignored him personally, came over to his booth. "Everything all right here, sir?" Henderson asked, his voice oozing a false sincerity that made Clara's skin crawl. "Can I get you anything else? A slice of our famous apple pie on the house?" Arthur, playing the part of Mr. Finn, looked up with wide, startled eyes. "Oh, no, thank you, sir. I couldn't possibly." "Nonsense. A man's got to eat." Henderson boomed, slapping the table jovially. He then shot a pointed look at Clara. "Our Clara here takes good care of you, I see. She's a good girl. A bit soft-hearted, but good." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. Henderson's sudden interest was a blaring alarm bell. She watched as he hovered, making small talk, trying to draw the old man out. But Mr. Finn remained quiet and reserved, offering only short, mumbled replies. The real break for Henderson came the following Tuesday. It was Arthur's designated day to visit the diner. Henderson had called in sick, but he wasn't at home. He was parked across the street in his beat-up sedan, a pair of cheap binoculars resting on his dashboard. He watched Mr. Finn leave the diner at his usual time. He watched him shuffle down the block. And then he watched as a gleaming obsidian-black Bentley Continental, a car that cost more than the entire diner, pulled up to the corner. A chauffeur in a crisp suit got out, opened the rear door, and the frail, penniless Mr. Finn got inside and was driven away. Henderson's jaw went slack. His heart began to pound with a furious, greedy rhythm. It all clicked into place. The old man wasn't poor. He was a millionaire. An eccentric millionaire playing some kind of game, and Clara, his naive, stupid waitress, was at the center of it. He didn't know why, but he knew with every fiber of his being that this was his lottery ticket. He just had to figure out how to cash it in. His strategy shifted overnight. He began a campaign to systematically dismantle Clara's relationship with the old man and insert himself as the true benevolent figure. He started by disciplining her in front of Mr. Finn. "Mayhew Table 6 has been waiting for their check for 5 minutes. Stop dawdling and get to it," he barked, while Mr. Finn was sipping his coffee. Clara, who had just dropped the check off, could only stare in confusion. Another time, he intercepted her, as she was about to deliver a refill. "I'll take that," he said, snatching the pot from her hand. He glided over to the booth. "Here you are, sir. Wouldn't want you to have to wait for the slow service." He began to subtly poison the well, pulling Clara aside when he knew Mr. Finn was watching. "You can't keep giving him handouts, Clara," he'd say in a loud stage whisper. "It's against company policy. You're enabling him." Clara was bewildered and hurt. Henderson's behavior was erratic and cruel. He was building a narrative painting her as an inefficient employee who broke the rules, and himself as the firm but fair manager trying to maintain order. The psychological toll on Clara was immense. Her home life was a nightmare of financial dread. Her work life, once a predictable grind, had become a minefield of anxiety. She started losing sleep. Her hands trembled when she carried trays. The one small act of kindness that had centered her helping Mr. Finn was being twisted into something ugly. Arthur saw everything. The test was no longer his to control. It had taken on a life of its own, and the raw, undisguised greed of the manager was a far more potent acid than any test of honesty he could have designed. He saw the toll it was taking on Clara. He saw the dark circles under her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped in defeat. Benjamin in their nightly debriefs was furious. "This has gone too far, Arthur. That man is psychologically torturing her. She's a pawn in a game between a billionaire and a wannabe. You have to end this." "Not yet," Arthur said, his voice hard. "I need to see her breaking point. Not of her kindness, but of her spirit. I need to know if she will break under injustice, or if she will stand up for herself, even when she has nothing." "And what if she just quits?" Benjamin challenged. "What if she walks away from the abuse as any sane person would?" "Then I'll know she has self-respect," Arthur countered. And that is also a virtue. But Arthur knew deep down that he was waiting for something else. He was waiting for the final, inevitable confrontation. He knew Henderson was setting the stage for a dramatic firing, a grand performance for his audience of one. And Arthur, as Mr. Finn, would have a front row seat. He had to let the sickness play itself out to see what lay at the core of the woman he was beginning to think of as more than just a subject in an experiment. The breaking point came on a Friday. Leo had had a bad turn. The doctors called Clara and told her that if he wasn't enrolled in the trial within the next month, it might be too late. The window of opportunity was closing. The news shattered her. She came into work that day, looking like a wraith, her face pale and her eyes hollow. She moved like an automaton, her spirit seemingly extinguished. Mr. Finn was in his booth. She approached his table, her notepad in her hand, but she couldn't bring herself to speak. She just stood there, staring into space. "Clara," he asked gently. "My dear, are you unwell?" She blinked, focusing on his face, and something inside her finally snapped. The dam of her composure, cracked by weeks of pressure, finally burst. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, followed by another. She didn't sob or make a sound. The tears just fell silent and steady. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice choked. "I'm so sorry. I'm so tired." Henderson saw his moment. This was it, the perfect performance. He stormed out of the kitchen, his face a mask of theatrical fury. Mayhew crying on the floor, crying in front of customers. Is this a diner or a soap opera? That's the last straw. He pointed a thick finger at her. "You are a distraction and a liability. I want you to clock out. You're fired." The words hung in the suddenly silent diner. The few customers present stared. Clara looked at him, her tear-streaked face, a mixture of shock and a strange hollow relief. Fired. It was awful, it was terrifying, but it also meant she didn't have to come back here tomorrow. From the back booth, a quiet, raspy voice cut through the tension. "No." Every head turned. Old Mr. Finn was slowly, shakily getting to his feet, his hand gripping the edge of the table for support. "You will not fire this young lady," he said, his voice trembling but clear. Henderson laughed a short, ugly bark. "Oh, yeah. And who's going to stop me? You can't even pay for your own coffee. Sit down, old man, before you hurt yourself." Arthur Chamberlain, disguised as the frail Mr. Finn, looked at the sneering manager. He looked at the heartbroken young woman who had shown him more decency than he had seen in years. The game was over. It was time to change the rules. "I believe," he said, his voice gaining a sudden, surprising strength, "that you are making a very, very serious mistake." The diner fell into a hush so profound that the sizzle of burgers on the grill sounded like a roaring fire. Every eye was on the confrontation unfolding between the belligerent manager and the frail old man who had suddenly found his voice. Henderson crossed his arms, a smug, contemptuous smirk playing on his lips. "A mistake. The only mistake I made was letting my bleeding heart waitress give you freebies for a month. You have no power here, Grandpa. Now sit down and finish your coffee before I have you thrown out with her." Clara, momentarily stunned into silence by Mr. Finn's defense, found her voice. "Sir, please don't," she urged him, her voice trembling. "It's not worth it. He's right, this is his diner. Let's just go." She tugged gently on his sleeve, but Arthur stood his ground. He ignored her plea, his watery blue eyes locked on Henderson. The frailty seemed to be peeling away from him, replaced by an unnerving stillness, a calm authority that was utterly at odds with his shabby appearance. "This diner, you say?" Arthur mused, his voice losing its raspy edge and deepening into a rich, clear tone that commanded attention. An interesting choice of words. "One would think you owned the place the way you lord over your staff. But you don't, do you, Mr. Henderson? You're just an employee." Like Clara, Henderson's smirk faltered. "What's that got to do with anything? I'm the manager. I do the firing." For now, Arthur said softly. The two words were not a threat. They were a statement of fact, and they hung in the air with chilling finality. He then turned his gaze to Clara. Her face was a canvas of confusion, fear, and concern for him. "Clara," he said, his voice now gentle, "this young woman has shown more integrity and compassion in a single shift than you have likely shown in your entire life. She gave from the little she had, while you who have more sought only to take. You saw her kindness not as a virtue to be admired, but as a weakness to be exploited." A nervous murmur rippled through the other customers. This was no ordinary dispute. Henderson's face began to flush a deep, blotchy red. He was losing control of the situation. "I don't have to stand here and listen to this senile nonsense. I'm calling security. Get out. Both of you." He reached for the phone behind the counter. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," a crisp new voice said from the doorway. The tinny bell chimed as Benjamin Carter stepped inside. He was the complete antithesis of the diner's grubby interior. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his silver hair was impeccably styled, and he carried a slim leather briefcase. He exuded an aura of wealth and power that instantly silenced the room. Benjamin's sharp eyes scanned the scene, Henderson frozen with his hand on the phone, a tearful Clara and Arthur standing tall in his pauper's disguise. "Mr. Henderson," Benjamin asked, though it wasn't a question. "My name is Benjamin Carter. I am legal counsel for the Chamberlain Investment Group." Henderson stared, his mouth agape. The Chamberlain Group was a titan in Chicago's financial world, a legendary firm known for its aggressive acquisitions and massive real estate portfolio. "Chamberlain, what does that have to do with anything?" Benjamin allowed a small, cold smile. As of 9:30 this morning, the Chamberlain Investment Group finalized the acquisition of the holding company that owns the commercial property at this address, as well as the business and all assets associated with The Willow Creek Diner. He paused for effect, letting the words sink in. To put it in terms you might understand, Mr. Henderson, we own you. Henderson's face went white. The blotchy red was replaced by a pasty, sickly pallor. His eyes darted from the immaculate lawyer to the old man in the tattered coat, and a horrifying, impossible understanding began to dawn in his mind. And my primary client, Benjamin, continued his voice, like Ice, the chairman and sole proprietor of the Chamberlain Group, likes to take a very hands-on approach to his new investments. He gestured with a respectful nod toward the old man. Mr. Henderson, I'd like to introduce you to your new boss, Mr. Arthur Chamberlain. Silence. Absolute deafening silence. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She stared at Mr. Finn, at Mr. Chamberlain, as if seeing him for the first time. The shabby coat, the trembling hands, the watery eyes. It was all a performance, a lie, a test. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. She felt a dizzying mix of shock, confusion, and a strange, sharp sting of betrayal. He had been watching her, judging her all this time. Arthur reached up and slowly undid the top button of his worn shirt. Then, with a fluid movement that belied his frail appearance, he shrugged off the tattered trench coat and let it fall to the floor. Underneath, he wore a simple, but obviously expensive collared shirt. He stood up straight, and the shuffling, stooped posture was gone, replaced by the confident bearing of a man accustomed to commanding boardrooms. The transformation was breathtaking. He was no longer Mr. Finn, the pitiable charity case. He was Arthur Chamberlain, the billionaire titan. Your services, Mr. Henderson. Arthur said, his voice, now imbued with the full weight of his authority, are no longer required. Mr. Carter has your final severance paperwork. I suggest you sign it and leave quietly. Our security team is waiting outside to escort you from the premises. Henderson looked as if he'd been punched in the gut. He opened and closed his mouth like a fish, but no sound came out. His petty kingdom had crumbled to dust in a matter of seconds. Defeated, he stumbled toward Benjamin, a broken man. Arthur then turned his full attention to Clara. Her eyes were wide, glistening with unshed tears of confusion. All the strength that had carried her through the past weeks seemed to have abandoned her. She looked small, vulnerable, and utterly lost. Clara, he said, his voice softening once more. We need to talk. She shook her head, taking a step back. I don't understand. You lied to me. All this time you were... What, testing me? Was I some sort of charity project? A game for a rich man with too much time on his hands? The hurt in her voice was a palpable thing. Arthur's heart ached at her words. He had anticipated this reaction, but it was far more painful to witness than he had imagined. It started as a test, yes. He admitted his honesty, unwavering. But it became something more. Please, let me explain. Everything. He gestured towards the booth, not his usual one, but the larger one by the front window. It was an invitation, a plea. After a long, agonizing moment, Clara slowly, hesitantly nodded. She slid into the booth, wrapping her arms around herself, as if to ward off a chill. This man, who she thought she knew, was a complete stranger. And she was about to find out why he had turned her life upside down. The diner, now free of Mr. Henderson, was still unnervingly quiet. The few remaining patrons were trying their best not to stare, while the other waitress, a girl named Stacy, busied herself polishing already clean glasses, her ears wide open. Benjamin Carter stood discreetly by the door, ensuring privacy. Arthur sat opposite Clara in the booth. The vinyl felt cold and unfamiliar now. He was no longer Mr. Finn, her pitiable friend, but Arthur Chamberlain, a man whose net worth could probably solve the debt crisis of a small country. The gulf between them felt a mile wide. Why, Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. It was the only question that mattered. Arthur leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. He looked her directly in the eye, and for the first time she saw him without the veil of his disguise. His eyes were not just pale blue. They were piercingly intelligent, and currently they were filled with a deep, weary sincerity. Because I was looking for something I had lost, he began, his voice low and steady. Something money cannot buy. I've spent the last 20 years surrounded by people who wanted something from me. My ex-wife, who saw me as a living bank account. Business partners who would smile to my face and plot behind my back. Even distant relatives who only called on my birthday to remind me to update my will. The wealth. It built a wall around me, Clara. A wall so high I couldn't see if there was anything genuine left in the world. He paused, letting his words sink in. I grew old, and I grew lonely. I have no children, no heir to my life's work. I decided I couldn't leave my fortune, my legacy, to another person who would just see it as a pile of cash. I needed to find someone with character. Someone with a good heart. Someone who would see a human being, not a dollar sign. He gestured around the diner. So I devised this experiment, a foolish, desperate plan of an old man. I chose this diner at random. I created the character of Mr. Finn, a man with nothing to see how the world would treat him. To see if I could find one person who would show kindness without any hope of reward. Clara listened, her expression unreadable. Her mind was reeling, trying to process the sheer audacity of it all. The first day you gave me coffee, Arthur continued, and covered the bill, I thought. She's kind. When you ran out into the cold to return my rent money, I thought, she's honest. But it was today, Clara. Today was the final piece. Today, she asked, her voice still a whisper. You mean when I was fired? When I broke down crying? Yes. You see, I saw your pain. I had Benjamin investigate your circumstances, discreetly. I know about your brother Leo. I know about the medical bills. I know about the clinical trial. Clara flinched as if he'd touched a raw nerve. Her private agony was now public knowledge for this stranger. You had me investigated. I had to understand, he said gently. I needed to know the weight you were carrying. And when I saw it, I was astonished. You were under a crushing, unimaginable pressure. By all rights, you should have been the most selfish person in this city. You had every reason to take that envelope of cash. You had every reason to tell me to get lost, to save every penny for your own troubles. But you didn't. His voice grew thick with emotion, and to Clara's astonishment, she saw his eyes begin to well up. The powerful billionaire, the master of the universe, was on the verge of tears. But what I saw today, when Henderson fired you, you weren't angry, you weren't bitter. You were just sad and tired. And your first instinct was to protect me. You told me to stand down, to not make a fuss. Even at your lowest moment, after being abused and humiliated and losing your livelihood, your immediate concern was for a helpless old man. You passed a test of character that I have no right to give. You didn't just show kindness, Clara. You are kindness. A single tear escaped his eye and traced a path through the wrinkles on his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. I didn't just find an heir to my fortune, he said, his voice cracking. I think I found a reason to believe in people again. And that is a gift you have given me. A gift far greater than any I could ever give you. The raw emotion in his voice, the genuine tears in his eyes, finally broke through Clara's shock and anger. She saw past the billionaire and the disguise. She saw the lonely old man he had confessed to being, an old man so starved for genuine human connection he had resorted to this insane, elaborate charade. Her own tears began to fall again, but this time they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of overwhelming, confusing relief. "My brother," she finally managed to say, her voice thick. "Leo. Leo is going to get the best care in the world," Arthur said, his voice firm and resolute. "Consider it done. The finest doctors, the best facilities, and a place in that clinical trial is being secured as we speak. You will never have to worry about a medical bill again for the rest of your life." Clara let out a choked sob, burying her face in her hands. The weight she had carried for so long, the suffocating burden that had dictated every moment of her life, was suddenly miraculously lifted. Arthur reached across the table, his hand hesitating for a moment, before he gently placed it on her shoulder. It was a gesture of comfort, of paternal affection. "This isn't charity, Clara," he said softly. "This is a partnership. I'm an old man. I need someone to help me guide my foundation, to ensure my legacy is one of compassion and not just cold stone and steel. I need someone I can trust. I need you." He was offering her more than money. He was offering her a purpose, a future she could never have dreamed of. He was offering her a way to turn her innate kindness into a powerful force for good. Clara slowly lifted her head, her tear-streaked face illuminated by the dreary afternoon light filtering through the diner window. She looked at Arthur Chamberlain, the man who had been a beggar and a king, and for the first time since he had walked into her life, she smiled. A real, genuine smile. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, Arthur." The change in Clara's life was immediate and absolute, beginning with the one thing that mattered most, Leo. Arthur Chamberlain's resources moved with astonishing speed. Within a day, Leo was transferred from his drab care facility to a private suite at a world-renowned hospital. A team of the nation's top specialists took over his case, and his spot in the life-changing clinical trial was immediately secured. Standing by his bedside, watching the city lights glitter over Lake Michigan, Clara felt the crushing weight she had carried for years finally lift. For the first time, the future felt not like a threat, but a promise. Arthur then turned his attention to the Willow Creek Diner, giving Clara a simple choice: sell it or transform it. Without hesitation, she chose transformation. She couldn't abandon the place that, despite its flaws, had been a refuge for so many, or the staff who depended on it. The diner closed for 2 weeks, reopening as Clara's at Willow Creek. The changes were stunning. The torn vinyl and cracked floors were replaced with warm wood and comfortable seating, and the kitchen was completely modernized. Yet Clara ensured its soul remained. She also instituted changes that mattered far more than aesthetics. As the new general manager and co-owner, she called a staff meeting and announced that every employee would receive a significant raise, full health benefits, and a pension plan. Her final act was to place a small framed sign by the cash register. "In this establishment, everyone is treated with dignity. If you are hungry but cannot pay, please speak with us. We are a community first, a business second." A few months after the successful reopening, as Clara was managing a busy lunch rush, the bell on the door chimed. A man stood there, looking hesitant and humbled. It was Mr. Henderson. He was visibly thinner, and the cruel arrogance that had once defined him was gone, replaced by a look of profound defeat. He approached her cautiously. "Clara," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't expect you to listen, but I had to come. I wanted to apologize. I was a cruel, greedy man. Seeing what you've done here, for the staff, for the customers. It just showed me how wrong I was. I lost everything, and I deserved to. I'm truly sorry." Clara looked at the man who had made her life a misery. She searched within herself for the anger and resentment she thought would be there, but found only a quiet pity. She remembered her own rule framed on the wall. "Are you hungry, Mr. Henderson?" she asked softly. He looked up, startled, his eyes welling with tears. He could only nod. "The tomato soup is very good today," she said, her voice gentle and even. "It's on the house." As she turned to place the order, she saw Arthur watching the exchange from a nearby booth where he'd been quietly observing. He met her gaze, and his eyes shone with a deep paternal pride. He walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. That Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion, is true character. Many people can show kindness to the deserving, but it takes a remarkable soul to show grace to the undeserving. In that moment, Clara understood that her journey had come full circle. Her kindness, once a quiet, instinctual impulse that cost her precious tips, was no longer a vulnerability. It had been forged by hardship and affirmed by trust. It was now her greatest strength, her guiding principle, and the foundation upon which she would build her new life. 5 years passed. The world turned, seasons changed, and the story of the waitress and the billionaire faded from the headlines, replaced by new scandals and sensations. But for Clara and Arthur, the real story had just been lived. Leo, against all odds, had responded remarkably to the experimental treatment. The degenerative effects of his disease were halted, and with intensive physical therapy, funded by the foundation, he regained much of his strength. While he would never walk without assistance, he was alive, vibrant, and enrolled in the University of Chicago, studying astrophysics. Clara would often watch him debate cosmic theories with Arthur in the expansive library of the Chamberlain estate, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. Clara herself had blossomed. Under Arthur's mentorship, she discovered she had a sharp mind for logistics and a natural gift for leadership. She took over as the executive director of the Chamberlain Foundation, transforming it from a passive check-writing entity into a proactive force for change across the city. They launched programs for homeless outreach-funded scholarships for underprivileged students and built state-of-the-art community centers in impoverished neighborhoods. Clara was the heart of the operation, Arthur, the wise counsel. They were an unstoppable team. Clara's at Willow Creek became an institution. It was famous not just for its food, but for its ethos. It was a place where lonely people found community, where struggling students could get a free meal during finals week, and where kindness was the daily special. Clara remained the owner, and she never lost her connection to it, often spending her Saturday mornings there, pouring coffee and talking to the regulars. Arthur, now in his late 80s, had found the peace that had eluded him his entire life. He had a family. Not one of blood, but one forged in a diner booth on a rainy Tuesday. In Clara and Leo, he found the children he never had. He wasn't just a benefactor. He was a grandfather figure, a mentor and a friend. The walls his fortune had built had finally come down, replaced by bridges of genuine human connection. One crisp autumn afternoon, Clara found Arthur sitting on a bench in the meticulously kept gardens of his estate, a plaid blanket over his legs. He was watching the leaves fall, a contented smile on his face. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, sitting beside him. He turned to her, his pale blue eyes clear and bright. "I was thinking about value," he said. "I spent my whole life calculating it. The value of a stock, a company, a piece of real estate. I was a master of the tangible. But I was an utter fool about what really matters. He reached out and took her hand, his own feeling thin and papery with age. The value of a cup of coffee given to a cold stranger. The value of honesty when no one is watching. The value of compassion in the face of cruelty. These things, they don't show up on a balance sheet, Clara, but they are the only things that give a life its true worth. He looked out at the garden, at the world bathed in golden light. My life was a series of successful transactions. But you, my dear, you taught me how to make an investment in humanity, and the returns have been immeasurable. Clara squeezed his hand, her throat tight with emotion. The frail old man she had met all those years ago had tested her heart, but in doing so, he had revealed the truth of his own. They had saved each other. In that quiet moment, surrounded by the beauty of the changing season, they both understood. The greatest fortunes are not the ones we accumulate, but the ones we give away. And the truest measure of a life is not what is in your bank account, but what is in your heart. Clara's story reminds us that the person right in front of us might be fighting a battle we know nothing about, and that a small gesture of grace can change a life, or in this case, 2 lives. Arthur's test wasn't about money. It was about the search for something real in a world that can often feel fake. He found it in the unwavering integrity of an everyday person, just trying to do the right thing. Their story is a powerful testament to the fact that you don't need to be a millionaire to be rich in spirit. True wealth is kindness, compassion, and the courage to help someone else, even when you're struggling yourself. If this story touched your heart and restored a little bit of your faith in humanity, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share it with a friend who might need this reminder today. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story about the hidden heroes and unexpected twists that make life so extraordinary. Thank you for listening.